All right, good morning, everybody. Let us like to welcome everybody that's coming here for the first time, or those who are returning. Welcome back. It is with great pleasure and an honor, I always say, to be here to be talking about Spiritism, to do this study and bring whatever I find, whatever I can gather for us to reflect together and to learn and to grow together. The topic of today is Blessed are the Merciful. And this was not something that I came up with in the sense of bringing this lecture to you guys. This was suggested by Abigail. She said she wanted to do a little bit more on the Beatitudes. So she said, pick one. I picked this one. Others were already taken. So it was great. So then we're going to learn together what this Beatitude means. What is a specifically thing that Jesus said in the famous sermon of Blessed are the Merciful, and then something else after. What does that actually entail? Specifically, she asked me to do focused on the gospel according to Spiritism, because there's an entire chapter on this specific beatitude. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. So this is one of the translations. We find this one in Matthew chapter 5. And I wanted to say that it's interesting because when we talk about the word mercy or being merciful, there are different interpretations to some extent. And if we look at the dictionary says that mercy is the compassionate treatment of those in need when it's within our power, or when it's in our power to punish or help them. So it already entails something that is compassionate, something that we have a say, we have an action that we can take towards that person that can be called something that's merciful or not. And it's interesting because it talks about this idea of punishing as well. So we're going to see parables and stories of when mercy is applied to punishment, but also when we have the ability to help people, so not to punish them, but to help them, we're also being merciful, and how we can also be merciful. And of course, this is one of the 8 Beatitudes. Just for curiosity's sake, I went and I tried to find different translations because I think words mean a lot, although we have to be careful with the literal interpretation, as the Apostle Paul always says, the letter kills, but the Spirit vivifies. So the idea, I wanted just to bring out of curiosity some of the translations in the specific version of the Bible that they have. So we see a few different variations here. We see that some say that the merciful shall obtain mercy. Others say they will be shown mercy. Others say received mercy or be treated with mercy. The main idea, obviously, and this is just a few. This is one page of 4 that I could do the screenshot because otherwise it would be too long. But just to show the idea, there's this consequence this connotation of a consequence. So the merciful will receive something in return, will be shown something in return, will obtain or receive something in return. That's something for us to think about, meaning that with that action based on mercy, I'm going to be shown or receive or obtain mercy myself. And if we think about the Spiritism and everything that this amazing movement has brought to us over the almost 200 years now, we know about the law of cause and effect. We know very well that what we sow exactly what we seed. So this is nothing extremely complex for us to understand, that when we're being shown mercy, we will receive mercy as a result as well. And the Gospel according to Spiritism, in that specific chapter, it approaches a few different aspects of this beatitude here. One of them is the forgiveness aspect. Of course, we're talking about being merciful, about being forgiven. And this one specifically, if we go back to the Bible, there's a few different places where we see forgiveness. Many different places where we see forgiveness. In Matthew here, we have, for if you forgive other people when they sin against you, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others their sins, your Father will not forgive your sins. This is extremely simple in a way, because back then, especially back then, there's this whole idea of this God that was very, imposing. They thought it was a God of love, but it was something way more strict in the sense of what was God for them. So this idea that is, you have to show mercy, And you have to forgive if you want forgiveness yourself. So it was already trying to put or incur in people's minds this notion of, I gotta give if I want to receive. I gotta show forgiveness. I gotta forgive if I want people to forgive me. And then there's the famous passage, we have this one in Matthew 18, where they're all together, and then Simon Peter says, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times? When I first read this passage, I was putting myself back in that time, trying to understand what it was like for Simon Peter to ask that question, because he offers a number. I think that's very interesting. He says up to 7 times. And I always like to think that in his mind, in that moment, he wanted to offer something that he probably thought quickly was very hard to do, 7 times. How many times must I forgive? And in his mind, like, 2 is hard, 3 is very hard. 7? And then Jesus comes to him and says, I tell you, not 7 times, but 70 times 7, which is 490 times. I can only imagine how they felt or what they must have experienced when they heard 70 times 7. I thought 7 was already very hard to forgive. 70 times 7? Interestingly, I've seen some translations of the Bible that says 77, which is already a very high number. But it's interesting for us to realize, and then we learn, afterwards, that is each offense, like that we receive. It's forgive it 490 times. Because there's this story with Chico Xavier when he was doing helping some people, and this woman came to him at one point, and she said, Chico, I think I understand the whole forgiveness thing, and I tell you, my husband is terrible with me, my sons are awful with me, and I have forgiven them 490 times, but I still feel this weight. I still feel very bogged down, and what should I do? And then Chico says, my dear, Emmanuel is next to me here, and he's telling me to tell you that is 490 times each offense. So not all combined all together, which in a way it's already hard, but it's saying each offense, which is, again, very interesting for us to think about, because this idea of the mercifulness goes through forgiveness. And specifically from the Gospel according to Spiritism, and I like to put on the top right corner the source material for that slide, so I always recommend people to go and buy the book and read and study for yourselves. But we're going to learn that mercy is a complement to mildness, because the person who is not merciful cannot be mild and pacific. Straight from the Gospel according to Spiritism, the version that I have. The person who is not merciful cannot be mild and pacific. In other words, meek. And what is another thing that we learn about the meek? They shall inherit the earth. Look at how things connect, how interesting it is. And then they also say in the gospel here, does not Jesus teach that mercy must have no limits? When he says that each one must forgive their brothers and sisters not merely 7 times, but 70 times 7, 490 times each of those offenses is extremely hard. It's basically having no limits. So they're saying, doesn't Jesus teach that there are no limits to the forgiveness? Why are we imposing limits ourselves to how many times we're going to forgive? I already forgave them, but if they do wrong for me again, I don't know. But that was only one. There's 489 left. So for, again, the spirits, Kardec, and they're always encouraging us to apply this idea of forgiveness and the mercifulness. And again, I said it goes through the path of forgiveness, and the idea is, that it connects well with something that the speaker Alberto Almeida, who was here last year for our conference, he was saying mercy without justice can become subservience, and justice without mercy can become tyranny. So if you have too much the idea of justice, but you're not merciful, you can become a tyrant. Again, for us to understand how all of these things connect to help us in our goal, like Susanna read in the beginning, step by step. And they also talk about that there are 2 ways to forgive and avoid future problems. That's what they say in the Gospel according to Spiritism. There is the first, way to forgive, or how we forgive, which they say it's noble and great, truly generous without any hidden thoughts, which delicately avoids hurting the supposed offender. So which delicately avoids putting the other person on the spotlight or making them feel very, very bad. I call it the A way. There's also the B way, which is when someone who has been offended, or they think they have been offended, then imposes humiliating conditions to the other one that's asking for their forgiveness. And that's the B way, because if we think of our evolution, we're going from here to there, but we can go through many different paths. And if we're doing the second way, the B way, of imposing humiliating conditions, or even if they say, yeah, maybe you're not humiliating the person, but there's also this hidden thought or this hidden intention of when you accept their forgiveness, you make a big deal out of it, just so people can look at you and say, ooh, how generous they are. And that's also the B way. That's also the second way. And they say to avoid future problems, because in a sense, we're talking about forgiveness of the heart versus the forgiveness of the lips. The intention behind it means the world. And when they say avoid avoid future problems, one of the cases we think about spiritual obsessions. So many books about that. I mean, David last week was talking about Manuel Filomeno de Miranda, right? And how much he has written about spiritual obsessions. And even in the Gospel according to Spiritism, they talk about how oftentimes, I dare say more often than not, all these cases of obsessions, they can very much go back to the root of somebody making a mistake and there's no forgiveness in that route. So there's this case of obsession, could be incarnate with incarnate, discarnate with incarnate, and vice versa. The books by psychographed by Ivone Pereira, there's one called Dramas of Obsession, that the first half of the book is this story about this Jewish family who had discarnated in the 1500s, and she's talking about something that's happening in the 1900s, 400 years later, or after the fact. That they were the obsessors of this now incarnated family or circle of people there, and their obsession was so strong that they had driven 2 people to kill themselves and a third one to attempt. And when they start to peer back into what happened among those clusters of individuals, they see that those people who are now in the 1900s incarnated and suffering this obsession, they were back in the moment of the Inquisition in Portugal and Spain. They were awful and destroyed those people, the Jewish family, their lives. But it lasted 400 years that they were obsessing this other family because of a lack of forgiveness. And this is, again, to give this the weight that this talk about forgiveness deserves. And Emmanuel, the benefactor, is going to tell us in this book that unfortunately we don't have in English yet. He says that on days when offense hits us in the face, forgiveness, much more than a blessing for our supposed offenders, is and always will be the best for us. So forgiveness, much more than a blessing for those who are perhaps asking us for the forgiveness or those who have erred against us, is and will always be the best for us. And that's actually the name of the message number 21, the best for us. Meaning we tend to gain actually way more when we are able to truly forgive with our full hearts something that somebody has done wrong to us, or even ourselves. Forgive ourselves as well for our mistakes, for our shortcomings. And he continues to say in this message that those who harm us or hurt us, they often find themselves entrenched or so attached in their own distress that deep down they suffer even more than us, the ones who receive the offense. And he also makes an analogy that I thought was interesting, saying that forgiveness is this, let's call it tool. I forgot the word he used, but it's this tool that we should use daily and on the small things. As he says, it's not like the formal clothing or like a tuxedo that we only use on special occasions. Saying forgiveness is not only for the big moral problems or the big, very grave mistakes. It's for all those things. Again, going back to the message that Susanna read in the beginning, step by step, little by little. And about reconciliation, because they also talk about this in the Gospel according to Spiritism in this chapter of the merciful. Blessed are the merciful. In Matthew, we find settle matters quickly with your adversary who is taking you to court. Do it while you are still together on the way. So he's saying, settle matters quickly while the person is still on your way. You guys are still together, let's call it, or walking the same path. And that is so true, because we'll never know what the future brings. We don't know how long it took, centuries sometimes, for us to be surrounded by the people that we need to ask forgiveness and receive forgiveness. So it is saying, while you're on their way, you better reconcile, because you don't know what's going to happen after that. And I said, and this is the question number 337 in this book that I was very happy that this year the United States Spirits Federation released it, translated in English, The Consoler by Emmanuel, psychographed by Chico. Question number 337 is such an interesting one. They asked Emmanuel, but how can we carry it out, the reconciliation, if our adversary does not share in the same desire for reconciliation? Meaning, if I want to reconcile with someone, but they don't share the same desire to reconcile with me, what should I do? And he says we must always fulfill our evangelical duty, seeking out our adversary for the necessary reconciliation. So he's saying that in the end, if they don't want to reconcile, we still must seek them out to reconcile, knowing that we're doing what is right and what must be done. Not just to be waiting on the other person and say, they don't want anything, I tried a little bit, they don't want, so I'll just leave it be. No, he's saying we really have to try. It said, in the sake of fraternity. At the very least, it says, in the evangelical duty, in the sake of fraternity. And now, in this book, The Way, the Truth, and the Life psychographed by Chico, also by Emmanuel, there's this message that he says about the mercifulness of God. He says, his merciful watch care may extend to everyone indiscriminately, but not everyone receives it. That is, innumerable people have locked themselves up in the circles of selfishness and pride, enveloping their hearts in thick darkness. God continuously bestows his blessings, but not all of his children are ready to receive them. We are extremely blessed. Extremely blessed. The amount of things that we should be grateful for, I say, at least for me, I can say further surpasses the amount of things I can name and intentionally be grateful for. But the idea here is we receive so much of this mercy from God that sometimes when we are, he's saying here, when we are enveloping our hearts in this thick darkness, propelled by selfishness and pride, which are the two scourges of humankind in this situation we're in, that halt our moral progress, when we are enveloping ourselves in that sort of darkness, we make ourselves impervious to that mercifulness. We are being our own worst enemies in those situations. And the idea he's saying here is that a lot of people don't receive, or they think they don't receive, because of their own actions and what they are doing. But at the very basic level, if we think about the opportunity that the incarnate ones who are hearing me right now, that we have received to have this is already God showing us mercy. This is already God showing us his love. Because how many times have we erred? How many bad things have we done in our past? But we're still here. We still received another chance out of mercy. Because his laws are laws of love. And the idea is for us to continue to understand the mercifulness of God, be grateful, extend that mercy, because then we will be shown mercy as we learn from the Beatitude. Emmanuel, in the message number 12 from another book called Our Daily Bread, he says that the body is a concession of the divine mercy so that the soul may prepare itself for the glorious future. The body is a concession. This is something we're borrowing momentarily. Those who are listening to me have a body right now. Momentarily. But for our own advancement and out of the mercy of God. Leon Denis says the mercy is the companion of kindness. I love that he says that. Leon Denis, another author, he says mercy is the companion of kindness. So everything is tying together. The forgiveness, the mercifulness, the opportunities we receive. And then they talk about indulgence in the Gospel according to Spiritism. They said indulgence does not see the defects of others, or if it does, it avoids speaking of them or divulging them. When will you judge first your own hearts, thoughts, and actions without occupying yourselves with what your brothers and sisters are doing? So they're almost pleading us. Almost 200 years ago this was written. And we still do that. And they're pleading us, when are you going to stop looking at what other people are doing, judging what other people are doing, and look at your own things, your own hearts, your own actions, your own thoughts. They say, be indulgent with regard to the faults of others, whatever these may be. Do not judge with severity any actions but your own. And I bolded, but your own. Then the Lord will be indulgent towards you according to the manner in which you have shown it to others. The law of cause and effect, which is a law of God. So that's implicitly or indirectly, that's what they're saying here. That if we are indulgent with others, we're also going to receive that law of order of cause and effect. Joanna DeAngelis in the book Happy Life, we read a message today, 115, but in the message number 25, Joanna DeAngelis, she has this whole speech of how we shouldn't be judging others and looking so much at what others are doing and pointing the finger. She says, you're not, I love that she said that, you're not an overseer of other people's behavior. You're not an overseer of other people's behaviors. And I dare say we put ourselves in that position, that unpaid position of overseer of other people's behavior and pointing finger and like, man, just look at what they're doing, look at what they did. As if we are the overseer of what their behavior, their lives, and we're not. So she's saying, if you have something to say about somebody, may that something be something kind, some words like that. And if you don't have anything kind to say, don't say it. Because otherwise you're going to be, slander and negative words. And also in the Gospel according to Spiritism, there's this question in the chapter that says, is it reprehensible to make note of the imperfections of others when this cannot result in any benefit for them, seeing that it will not be disclosed to them? I'm going to repeat the question. Is it reprehensible to make note of the imperfections of others when this cannot result in any benefit for them, seeing that it will not be disclosed to them? Everything, that's the answer. Everything depends on the intention. For sure, it is not forbidden to see evil where it exists. It would also be really inconvenient to see only good in all places. This illusion would prejudice, that's the word that they use, prejudice or hamper or halt progress. The mistake would be in making the observation result in the detriment of your neighbor. And they go even further to say it would be also equally bad to do it just to vent a sentiment of spite. If I'm speaking ill of somebody else's that's doing an evil doing, just out of spite. Or to try to, because of pride, put myself above them. So we look at these words and it's interesting because they say it depends on the intention. Not everything is good. We live in a planet of trials and expiations. We're far from being perfect beings in the plenitude of the Spirit that we carry within us. So he's saying it's not about not looking at evil and not seeing evil anywhere. There is a lot of bad. When we look at all these wars that are happening, we can't turn a blind eye to it. We can't just say, oh no, everything is pink and beautiful. No, there's a lot of that, but everything depends on the intention. How are we verbalizing, and the point of the purpose of, or the objective of what we're saying? There must have an intention that's good, and not just out of spite, or not just to make the detriment of someone else, our neighbor. And then we go to the Holy Bible, then talking about slander and judgment, because this is something that they approached here in this chapter. And in Matthew we have, for in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. But the things that come out of, this is another passage, the things that come out of a person's mouth come from the heart. And these things, the words, these defile them when they're coming from the heart. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false testimony, and slander. Anyone who speaks ill of a brother speaks ill of the law and judges the law. And if you judge the law, you are no longer a follower of the law, but a judge. And we're not judges. We're not overseers. We're not judges. We can't judge the other person, because then we're judging the law. We're trying to do the work that is not supposed to be our work. And the idea here, first and foremost, because we can't judge because we don't know what that person's life is. We don't know what that person's past lives were. We don't know the challenges that they carry. We don't know the challenges that they chose to carry as they come into this world. We barely know our own. How can we judge someone else by the things that they are doing? How many times we look and we may quickly judge in our own thoughts, but if we stop to realize that maybe that action that for us is so abhorrent is already perhaps an advancement for that spirit that has sinned so much, that has erred so much. So again, a lot of these topics, they date back millennia. This one about slander and judgment, and when we look at it too, they were very concerned back then. This was what the discussion was like, what goes out of the mouth, was because there was a lot of this discussion of the impurities of what people were eating, especially in that specific context of the cultural and religious context of that time. But Jesus is saying it's not, you're too focused on what you're putting in your mouth and not so focused on what's coming out of your mouth, because what's coming out of your mouth, it's coming from here. And that's what's going to defile you. Emmanuel, in this book called Book of Hope, I don't think we have this one in English, he says that words are agent in the construction of all the buildings of life. The verb is the light of life, with Jesus himself used to bequeath to us the renewing gospel. Bequeath means to leave by, to hand down. So he's going to say something that I love. He's going to give us a prescription of how we can use our verb. Let's pay attention. In everyday work, be it as natural as the simple bread on the table. In the effective exchanges, our verb, our word, let us use it as pure water. In serious moments, let us do it like the surgeon's scalpel, which prudently limits itself to the incision in the diseased area without unnecessary blows. And on sad days, let us consider it an efficient remedy without deviating from the dosage. Beautiful. This is a prescription for us on different moments of our lives, in different situations, how we use the verb, how we use this tool that we acquire through our own spiritual evolution. And my favorite one, I gotta say, is the third one, where he says, in serious moments, let us use it as the surgeon, like the surgeon's scalpel. If we think of a surgeon using a scalpel, it goes exactly, the incision is exactly where it needs to be in serious moments, because you're doing an operation with a scalpel because things are going wrong there. So when something goes bad, we use our word as the surgeon's scalpel, which is very precise and limits itself to the diseased area. How many times have we failed to do that in discussions, in arguments, in difficult situations, where we don't use our word as a scalpel, but as a butcher's knife, or the lumberjack's axe, instead of just using it as the scalpel. Moreover, still in the same chapter, the other thing they talk about is the mote and the beam. And there's this passage that says, "And why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye, but do not consider the plank in your own eye?" Because there's different translations for the speck, the plank, the mote, the beam. There's different word usage throughout the years. But it's a hypocrite. First remove the plank from your own eye, and then you'll see clearly to remove the speck, the little thing from your brother's eyes. Meaning, we oftentimes look at that something that's very small that somebody is making a mistake on, or they're not right on what they're doing, when we don't look at ourselves and we have something way bigger in our own eyes. One of the follies, they continue, of humanity consists in seeing wrongdoing and evil in others before seeing it in ourselves. So we see in others, but we don't see it in ourselves. And if we think, I put a hand pointing here, if we think when we're pointing at somebody with a judgmental attitude, if we think about it, there's 3 fingers pointing at us when I'm pointing at somebody. And that's how it should be. I should be looking more to myself than to others. And this is something that they talk about, again, the lack, not be judgmental towards others, not try to see wrongdoing only in other people's, but our own, because that is an act of mercy. That's how it connects with the mercifulness. Because when we're being charitable, when we're being kind towards other people, and we're not just seeing the speck in them, when we have a beam in our own eyes, we're exercising this mercy. And they say pride, being the father of many vices, is also the negation of many virtues. Wise sentence. Pride, being the father of many vices, it's also the negation of many virtues. It negates a lot of virtues that we're still trying to master, that we're still trying to work on. Therefore, it was because pride is the principal obstacle to progress that Jesus tried so hard to combat it. Jesus really, really tried so hard to combat pride, to show this meek aspect of himself, this forgiving aspect of himself, this loving aspect of himself that put others above himself even in the things that he was doing out of love, out of mercy. And they go even further to say that we should, in the gospel according to Spiritism, they say, in order to be able to judge ourselves, we have to see it ourselves through a mirror. And if we see ourselves through a mirror, put ourselves in somebody else's head and look at what we're doing and think, what would we think if we saw somebody doing what we're doing? And really be honest about it. What would I think if I saw somebody doing exactly what I did? Then, with sincerity and with humbleness, we can judge ourselves and see where we need to improve and how much we need to improve. Because they also go on to say, but pride gets in the way of that. Because in my pride, I don't want to do that. I don't want to see the beam in my own eye. I want to see the speck in my brother's eyes. But they're also saying pride is pride that leads a man to disguise his own defects. Disguise from himself even. Not to want to look at my own defects and what I need to improve, what I need to change. So further on, they talk about casting the first stone. I absolutely love thinking and talking about this story. I mean, in all the messages and everything that happened. And Amelia Rodriguez, unfortunately, don't have her books in these 2 books that I'm going to mention in English yet. But in this book here, because she talks on both books, is chapter 13. She talks about that situation where Jesus was with the apostles. He was walking near the Nicanor gate next to a temple where there was this commotion. And there were the scribes and the Pharisees. They were dragging a woman that was very distressed, half naked even. They were dragging this woman and they were ferocious with her. And as he's going there, they grab him. They say, come here. And John narrates this passage. And he's saying that they caught her in adultery. and they're really mad and what they have done in the past in situations like this. In next to that same temple, in that same area, was to cast stones on the woman because she committed a sin, a very mortal sin, adultery. She was caught with somebody else, defiling her own marriage. So when Jesus approaches that and see that the crowd is they're vociferating and they're ferocious and they're all ready to start throwing stones at that poor woman, Jesus, the first thing that he does when they start asking him, what should we do? What do you say? Then he bends down, gives a look of love towards the woman, and he, with his own finger, I thought this was so interesting, he starts to write things on the ground. And they continue asking him questions, and he's there almost like in his own world, writing things on the ground with his finger. As he finishes writing them, he stands up and he glances, toward the woman, and he understands that by their law, like, she should, I'm putting quotation marks because that was what the law said, of course we know it shouldn't, but the woman should be stoned. So what happens is, when they start asking him questions, then they start to look at what he wrote on the ground. What Jesus wrote on the ground was a bunch of negative qualities or sins even. So he wrote liar, slanderer, thief, and a bunch of these things on the ground. He just wrote it there. And then when they're saying, what do you say we should do to her? She was caught in adultery. Moses' law said this. But when he wrote those things on the ground, Amelia is going to tell us that what happened was people started to look at all those things, and they saw that at least to one of them, each of those members there were able, or hypocrites, whatever, they were able to identify themselves in those qualities that he wrote. So he said, I don't remember the exact words, but he said, no, if you have no sin, then just cast the first stone. But he prompted them, even without saying anything, to look at the ground and be able to realize that, wait a second, I've done that. Can I really throw a stone here? And in the end, what happened? Nobody threw any stones. And then, he said, no, women, where are your accusers? Nobody condemned you, neither do I. Go and sin no more. Look at the mercy of Jesus in that moment. Go and sin no more. He helped her in a very direct yet indirect way, because he wasn't debating with them. He wasn't arguing with them. He wasn't speaking for her, but he was speaking for her when he was writing and making them see themselves, almost as if he was raising mirrors to each one of those scribes and Pharisees so they can look at themselves and say, can you really throw a stone? Are you really that pure? Because if you are, then do it. Nobody did. And then in the other book, also chapter 13, she talks about the same situation, the same moment in time. And she's talking about this time with a different angle, where she's saying that among those who were there was the husband, that was the husband of the woman, the adulteress. And he was also there. He wanted her to be stoned as well. But Jesus looks at him, and there's a mental conversation where he is talking to him and making him see that he also is responsible for that condition that she was in. For her mistake, he also had a part in her mistake, in her sin. Because he had abandoned her as well. He had also looked for prostitutes. Of course, he doesn't use that word, but that's what they mean. He was also co-responsible. In the same chapter, Amelia also brings attention to the fact that nobody went looking for the perpetrator as well. They wanted to throw stones at the woman, but what about the guy who did the deed with her, who was having the sexual intercourse with her? That guy ran. As soon as he was caught, he ran away, but nobody wanted justice to be brought to him. Again, showing that selective and very sexist and terribly prejudiced society of the time. And again, she's talking about how Jesus in his mercy, he's talking to this man in his own mind. And after the whole thing is done, Amelia tells us that the husband of that woman actually goes, and after some time they try to reconnect and they try to, make amends, because he also saw that he was wrong in everything he was doing that led to that point. He was a co-participator in her mistake. But this is Jesus's way to understand and teach how mercy should be applied, because those people, they were ready to throw stones at this woman, as they had done on many different occasions in that same place. But he convinced them with love and with raising those mirrors and with the power of his words. In the Gospel according to Spiritism, they say, before we blame somebody for a fault, let's see if the same blame can't be given to us. Well, what about the censorship? This is what I put. What about the censorship of evil? They're going to say the authority to censor is in direct proportion to the moral authority of the one who censors. Jesus did not prohibit the condemnation, that's what they're saying, of evil. He did so many times and very emphatically. But the idea is there has to be this authority and the self-knowledge that if I'm going to censor to some extent, I need to be clear of that thing that I'm censoring. If I'm a liar, how am I going to censor somebody for lying? That's what they're saying. The moral authority must be the support for that. Because as they they also say, we can't turn a blind eye to evil. Because after all, the purpose of the knowledge and everything that we are acquiring, we're trying to work on ourselves, is so we can better ourselves, but also better our society. So the law of progress can continue non-stop. And there's also two parables that we have in the Bible they mention. One is the unmerciful servant, so talking still about blessed are the merciful. And in this parable, Jesus was telling how there was this servant who owned 10,000 bags of gold to his Lord. 10,000 bags of gold is an amount that he would have to live 10 different lives, and he probably would never amount that much. Basically, what Jesus was saying is he owed something to his master that he could never pay. Physically speaking, like in earthly terms, he could never pay. Could never get 10,000 bags of gold. But he owed that to his master. So he comes to the master, and the master says, you can't pay me, so I'm going to have to sell you, your wife, and your children so I can get a very tiny portion of that debt back. And then he falls on his knees, cries, and begs for mercifulness. And then the Lord said, okay. Then he said, be patient with me, I'll pay back. But the master, seeing the man in that situation, he took pity on that man, and he forgave his debt, the entire thing, and he let him go. But that same servant, when he left, he saw somebody, another servant that owed him 100 silver coins. He went, grabbed him by the neck and said, you're going to pay me, you're going to pay me. He went and talked to the guards. The guy was thrown in jail because he owed 100 silver coins, etc. The moral of the story is this. Then they come and they tell that servant, that Lord, hey, your servant just did that. And he brings the person back and says, did I not forgive you? Did I not forgive your debt? How can you go and do that to somebody who owes you way less? Did you not learn anything? So again, Jesus, through parables, which interestingly, the word parable from the Latin parabola means to put to the side, or to cast to the side. Because if you think of the parables, none of them were directly saying you, or you. They were stories that he just put it there, and whoever sees that they're fit for them, they're going to feel it. Parabola. And the idea here with the parable is just to explain how we owe so much. Through all our mistakes, sometimes things we won't be able to, in one reincarnation, pay back. Through the law of cause and effect again. But our God is merciful with us and always gives us a chance, forgives our debt so we can try again. That's what they're trying to explain in this one. And the other parable here, this is the last one. We see this one in Luke 10. It's the famous parable of the Good Samaritan. And Samaria was a region close to where the Jewish lived, that they had, it was a different people. They had different religious views, although they had way more in common than not, but they were constantly at war, etc. They didn't like each other. So Jesus very smartly one day he was in a place where this expert of the law stood up, and he asked him, "Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?" Which is interesting, because we think already the immortality of the soul. If that person that was rooted in the Judaism was asking, what can I do to inherit eternal life? Then Jesus said, and really, again, we never know with the words exactly what he was said, but it definitely sounds like something that a very advanced mind would say. He says, what is written in the law? What is your reading of it? And I love that part. What is your reading of it? You're the expert of the law. What is your reading of it? And he says, the person cited very well, he said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. That's what was written in the law. And then Jesus said, you have answered rightly. Do this and you will live. Meaning you will live forever. All those things that you just said. But the man, and there's different translations here, but the one I had says he wanting to justify himself. Because of course when he read that and Jesus said, yeah, do exactly that, there was a question in his mind, and he voiced that. He says, and who is my neighbor? Because if we remember, Samaria was close to that. There was other regions as well that were always at war in that time, still today. And in his mind, he's probably saying, I can't love those people. Well, who is my neighbor then? And then Jesus tells the parable of this man who went down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among thieves who stripped him of his clothing, wounded him, and departed, and leaving him half dead. Now by chance a certain priest was walking by, saw that man half dead, and didn't do anything, continued on his way. And then a Levite, which was one of the people that were in charge of doing the ritualistic things at the temple and fixing the temple, etc. He was also passing by, didn't do anything to help that person that was half dead and has beaten up by thieves. Continued on his way as well. But then came a certain Samaritan as he journeyed, meaning the Samaritan was on his way to do something. He wasn't just walking by like for no reason. He was on his way, but when he saw that person, he came to him, bandaged their wounds, tended to them. And Jesus says he poured oil and wine. And this is so apt, because oil and wine were directly related to rituals and religious traditions of the time. Meaning, he's using the same thing the priest and the Levite had. He had oil and wine. He poured oil and wine in that person. He bandaged them, put the person that was suffering on his own horse, and went to an inn, slept there, took care of that man, and then the next day he gave 2 denarii to the innkeeper, and said, take care of him. Whatever more you spend, when I come again, I will repay you. So he literally got out of his way to take care of a complete stranger of a different region, a different religion, different cultural background in him that he's never met. He saved that man's life, took care of them kindly, brought them to the innkeeper, paid for them, and said to the innkeeper, if you end up spending more to help him, I'll come back and pay you. So Jesus turns to him and says, so which of these 3 do you think was neighbor to him who fell among the thieves? And the expert of the law said, he who showed mercy on him. This is what we tie in with the mercifulness. And then Jesus says, go and do likewise. Help those who are falling, or who have fallen down. Your neighbors. Because we are all neighbors. We're all from the same Heavenly Father. And interestingly, just to end our conversation today, interestingly, there's this book called Courage, psychographed by Chico, by Emmanuel, chapter 18. He's talking about how the apostles, when they were amongst themselves with Jesus, they were commenting on this parable, and they were judging the Levite, the priest, and this and that, and oh, that was nice of the Samaritan, or the innkeeper was very nice as well because he took faith. He also showed mercy. But Jesus went. Emmanuel says that Jesus went even further. He said, if we were to really look, meaning like you guys think that the Samaritan is the pinnacle of charity and mercifulness, there's way more. He said, if we were really to look and we saw somebody, and he says, irradiating love as he was passing by, he would do exactly the things he did for the fallen man. But he would also send a prayer to the thieves that needed the help. The priest and the Levite were still wrong in their ways. And to the innkeeper. Look how Jesus took that to a whole new level. He would also send a prayer because those people also need help. Perhaps it's less apparent, perhaps was less urgent, but he's saying those people also needed the help. And with that, I wish everybody a very blessed week. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Yuri. So much to think about. And I think one of the biggest challenges after we listen to a lecture like this is to live here and think, okay, what does this mean to me at a personal level, right? Because you brought so much. I mean, there's a lot in this. And going back to Joanna, maybe the entire lecture is too much, but we can choose one aspect. Perhaps one of the parables, perhaps one of the readings, one little point that stuck to you, that call your attention, and say to yourself, okay, during this week or maybe during the rest of this day, because by tomorrow we get back to our Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday pace and things go away, right? So how do we make the most of our Sundays? Of course, we came here, it was nice, we heard all these inspiring things, but it's really important that they are not just a theoretical lecture, a nice stuff that we heard. So again, try to remember one thing that really kind of spoke to you, and go home and, try throughout the week to think, what does that mean to me? What are the barriers to implement this kindness, this forgiveness, this whatever it is, right? What are the barriers? Why is it so difficult? So if you take time just to do this reflection, you're already doing the work. It was already worth it coming here, as far as like, it's always worth it, but you were really making the most out of the content. All right, so now we're going to go to the second part of our meeting, which is the prayer and passes. Put the music back on. Let's ask the past givers to stand up.